Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here, previewing Oklahoma and Auburn on Saturday, the Big 12 SEC Challenge. This is an interesting matchup between two teams, one that's maybe the hottest team in the country in Auburn, and an Oklahoma team that just snapped a losing streak, but very competitive team, and a very intriguing matchup because Oklahoma can do some things, or maybe not do some things as much as has some attributes that maybe can neutralize some of what Auburn is really good at. Now, on the flip side, Auburn's going to give Oklahoma some problems where it's weak, but I think on paper, this is a fun one to break down.
Yeah, I mean, I think look, this Oklahoma team isn't great, but I think you can, like you said, you can obviously find some things here that if you're trying to match up against the number one team in the country, where are some areas you can take advantage of? And I think there are a couple of things you look at here is for number one, right? This is a very experienced team. Like I think they're starting pretty much four seniors a lot of the time. So this is a group that has some players that have been in these spots before. And I think that's always something that's important, especially as we're going to bring up. Again, there's no atmosphere in the SEC, maybe in the country, or at least one of the top ones in the country, like playing at Auburn Arena. And we've seen that play out. Go back to the Auburn-Kentucky game. Go back over the past several years. It's been that way. And so I think Oklahoma is really going to have to be able to navigate that part of it because, if you look back at their schedule and such, they have been a team that has not actually played that bad on the road. And, you look at some of their games, go back at kind of the game at Baylor, I think they lost by 10, but, a very competitive performance in those kind of games. And then they just won that game at West Virginia. They played well at TCU, Texas. They didn't play that great. They only scored 52 in that one, lost by 14. But, I think this is an interesting team, again, because you do have some experienced players who I think if you put it all together, they can obviously do some things to challenge Auburn. And if you just look at the numbers, certainly it's a team that's going to get a lot of their points, inside the perimeter. I know a lot of people have been pointing out, just how efficient they are from two and those kind of things. So, yes, and it's a good defensive team, right? We always talk about this. Like if you're in one of these types of matchups, you're going to play a tempo that's a little bit slower than Auburn, of course, and you want to try to turn this into your kind of game, grind it out. Because, right, we saw that with Missouri, did we not? Like against Missouri and Auburn, like that's sort of the same thing is I think that's how Oklahoma wins this game is you have to be able to turn this into a Missouri-esque game where grind it out, use your defense because it is a good defensive team. Now, they've had some challenges offensively, but defensively, that's another thing. If you look at this team, they've played pretty well on the defensive side. You go back, I think it's their last 6 or 7 games I was looking at. Maybe it's their last 6. But, they haven't given up 70 points in any of those games. I think the last 6 games or so. Maybe it's 5, somewhere in there. It's in that range. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like this is a team that has to play in that range, I think, to be able to win a game like this. But there is one glaring thing that I'm just going to point out up front here. The issue I think you look at for Oklahoma here, where I'm going,
Turnovers.
is they are 322nd in the country in turnovers, 15.1 turnovers per game. I think that is the one thing that if we look back at this game and let's say Auburn runs away with this, which I don't know if that's going to happen, but if it does happen, that I think is what we're going to say. Oklahoma just could not take care of the ball. And again, add in the atmosphere. I think there's a lot of things in Auburn's favor here.
Well, and Auburn is not Baylor defensively, and Auburn's an outstanding defensive team, but Baylor, which is a really good team, maybe the best team they played defensively all year, being Oklahoma. You turned it over 25 times against Baylor. You look at some other games recently, they turned it over 17, even though they beat WVU, 11 against Kansas, 20 against TCU, 17 against Texas. You've got Katie Johnson and Wendell Green who will really get into you. Now, I think that's where officiating comes in a little bit too. And I'm going to shift the conversation to the paint, where Oklahoma, I think, is number 4 in the country in 2-point percentage on offense and only has a very small number of its shots blocked. I think they're number 4 in the country in terms of not having shots blocked. That's one of those that I don't know how that holds up, right? Because you cannot get your shots blocked, but you're not going to play against Walker Kessler every day either. So this
I
is
was
kind
gonna
of
say,
like,
yeah,
and this is kind of like the whole baseball thing where you've got an elite fastball pitcher and an elite fastball hitter, and how does this resolve? You just don't know till they take it there. But I think this is where this game being in Auburn with the crowd and everything, look, a lot tilts on calls, and it's no secret in that type of atmosphere, you're going to get the calls your way more often than not. I just wonder how all that combined with how the game is called and foul troubles, how that plays in.
again, to me, it's all about who plays the style they want to play because
Yeah.
Oklahoma, I don't think can play the way Auburn wants to play because I think that's where the turnovers would come in. If you get in this game where it's just go, 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 I think that leads to more turnovers, right? And I just think that, you've kind of set that to this point where again, if you're turning over 15 times a game and you're playing a team that has been really good at that, right? At forcing turnovers, and you've got all the atmosphere and all those elements. That's where I think it does help that Oklahoma's an experienced team. They played at Baylor, right? Like they played against some of these top tier teams on the road. They played at Texas. Um, but I still think this is a huge challenge for them to be able to go on the road and win a game like this. This is where I think if you look at it from that, like this is where your respect for Porter Moser comes in. Is you would
Yeah.
expect him to put his team in a position to have a chance in a game like this. But if you just compare it from a matchup standpoint, I mean, I don't know. Like, is Auburn? I think Auburn's probably 10 points or more better than Oklahoma, and so I think that's where you kind of look at this, and that to me is going to determine this game is who can play the way they want to play. And I also think what Auburn has in its favor is this: that Missouri game, as we said, was the ultimate trap game. But now that you've
Yeah.
gotten that out of the way, you're telling me Bruce Pearl is not going to use that to get his guys' attention to say, hey, we might have beat Kentucky. We may be the number one team in the country, but we're literally, a tip or one play away from losing at Missouri. We can't just, we can't sit back and settle against anyone. Is Auburn going to be looking ahead to Alabama, right? Like that's the next game after that. I don't think so. And
No.
that's why I think that Missouri game was in such a good spot. Looking back, it was not obviously not what you want, but you win the game and, you kind of, you move on now and can kind of throw that out, but you can still use that as an example of what can happen. So I really like Auburn in the spot. I think that, again, the Missouri game to me was perfect for this game for Auburn because now you're able to kind of regroup, get that one out of the way, and come back to your arena where you've got all this momentum. And I think it's gonna be a challenge for Oklahoma.
Ken Pomeroy has got this game as Auburn by 10. And I keep thinking about the tempo thing you said, because I think if OU keeps it close or pulls an upset, it's going to have to control the tempo, which when you've got Green and Flanagan and KD Johnson and some of the guys they've got, and no disrespect to Oklahoma, but that's fast for just about anybody. And I come back to this too. It goes back to turnovers. A lot of times when you play fast, it's coming off a turnover. And again, that's just where Oklahoma's had so many issues. I mean, OU's a really tough team. I mean, this team
Yeah.
has competed well for a long time. Porter Moser, we both have a high opinion of him. But that's the problem as I see it for OU, is Auburn trying to control the tempo in its arena, and turnovers when they've typically been a problem for OU and Auburn can force them. That's where you have a hard time slowing the game down. And that's where I'm kind of with you on this, that there's a scenario where this could get out of hand.
Yeah, two other quick things. If you're Oklahoma, you wanted Jabari Smith to have his bad game this game, but now that he's gotten that out of the way,
Yep.
I think he comes back with a vengeance here. I think that, it's a chance for him to have a really big bounce back game. The other thing, Oklahoma has played a pretty tough schedule, and I think that's
Yes.
where this is where that element comes into play. And it's like, you kind of lean one way for a second. You're like, well, I do think Auburn probably wins this game by double digits if they can play it the way they want to play it. But man, Oklahoma's played a tough schedule, and they've been in these spots before, like I said, but I don't know if they've been in a spot like this where they're playing at Auburn, the number one team in the country. And really, I just think that it's going to be. I think the issue for Oklahoma is going to be how do they put enough sustained offense up against this Auburn team and not turn it over to the point to
Yeah.
where that gives Auburn so many more opportunities. Because look, too, right? they're already probably going to get some second chance opportunities just based off of Kessler, based off of
Yeah.
Smith, those kind of guys. So I think you just cannot give Auburn those extra chances. And that's where I think that probably Oklahoma may give Auburn too many of those chances, and that allows Auburn to win this one.
Well, and Oklahoma's been decent at keeping teams off the boards, and Oklahoma's got two good bigs inside, Tanner Groves, Ethan Chargois. So it's not like, again, it's not like we think Oklahoma is just nothing. We've just watched Auburn play all year, and it's a team that when it shows up, we still have not figured out how do you beat these guys. And again, at a time where they're at home, excitement around the program has never been higher. They just had their scare. Just a lot of things seem to line up in Auburn's favor.
Yep, I'd agree. I think that's the best way to put it. Is I just think that all we can do, right, is go off of what we've seen on paper. What we've seen and what we look at on paper, and if you combine those two things together, I'm with you in that. I think there is a potential because of the turnovers. If you take the turnovers out of the equation, I'd probably have a hard time saying I think this game can get out of control. But just because of that aspect and knowing how Auburn likes to play, there's that potential, I think, in a game like this. Although, like I said, I think the respect for Porter Moser and just knowing that Oklahoma's a team that hasn't given up a lot of points, that is something, too, that makes you wonder. 10's a lot of points to say I'm fully confident on that. But I think Auburn is in a good spot.
One little last point of information before we end. I did talk about how turnovers can lead to some fast buckets for Auburn on the other end, and that's what scares me. Oklahoma, in spite of the turnover issues, and I don't know if this means that a lot of them have been dead ball turnovers or what, but OU 310th in the country in terms of possession length on defense. So somehow at times they've been able to mitigate some of that in terms of quick buckets at the other end. Either that or they're getting quick buckets and they're just grinding people to 28 seconds on possessions when it isn't a turnover situation. But just thought I'd throw that out just to be fair to all sides. Okay, we've got a nice partnership with Action 24/7. Tell folks about that.
Yep, we'll put it in the description of the video below. You click on that. Use code South14. First deposit, they'll match up to $800. So just click on that. Yeah, South14, and we'll have those in the description of all of our videos here on the channel. So yeah, be sure to check it out.
Plenty more previews coming up of the challenge this weekend. We'll have many more of those. And if you're watching, please hit the subscribe button. That helps us out. And we'll be back with more of these very soon.